We have assisted me in the Opani department, my regulars for this part of the hour and this part of the week, my battling buddies, as I like to affectionately refer to them as. First, Bob Weiner, Robert Weiner, if you will, Democratic strategist, columnist, and former communications director for Clinton Drug Czar General Barry McCaffrey. He's also former chief of staff of the House Committee on Aging. Bob, good to have you back.
Alan, it's a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
On board as well, Amy Ridenour, president of the National Center for Public Policy Research. Amy, good to have you as well.
Thank you, Alan.
Oh, by the way, the more pressing measure and concern, this, of course, transcends all national and international interest. Bob, you're coming to my party. Amy, are you?
I'm afraid I can't do it, Alan.
You're breaking my heart. What do you break my heart for? Just, I'm crushed.
Alan actually wants just liberals to come to his party.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, then I can't go.
Well, you would be the perfect Trojan horse, kiddo. Anyway, Amy, let me go to you on this one first. We're hearing some rumblings from Democrats insisting that the debt ceiling should not be used. It would be a simple smack in the face against all those who take responsibility seriously. It's an affront to Americans of all stripes to have our nation walk away from the full faith and credit of the country, to renege on its debts, if you will. But it seemed that not all that long ago, some Democrats were perfectly inclined to do that very thing. Have a listen to what then Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid had to say about the issue of the debt ceiling hike. Derek, if you please.
How can the Republican majority in this Congress explain to their constituents that trillions of dollars of new debt is good for our economy? How can they explain that they think it's fair to force our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren to finance this debt through higher taxes? That's what it'll have to be. Why is it right to increase our nation's dependence on foreign creditors? They should explain this. Maybe they can convince the public they're right. I doubt it. Because most Americans know that increasing debt is the last thing we should be doing. After all, I repeat, the baby boomers are about to retire. Under the circumstances, any credible economist would tell you we should be reducing debt, not increasing it.
Amy, it does appear as if math is still what it always was, whether it's today or 1,000 years ago. 5 plus 5 still equal 10. So if math and all these other considerations are why we shouldn't even think of using the debt ceiling hike as leverage today, why was it perfectly permissible in 2006, Amy Ridenour?
Well, it's not. Clearly, Senator Reid, while I agree with everything he said there, was saying that because a Republican was president, and now that there's a Democrat as president, he has the alternate view. What folks have to do when things like this are going on is to step back, take the personalities out of it, and look at the facts devoid of personalities. If people honestly think that the way to prosperity is to borrow 46 cents out of every dollar the federal government spends, then they'll want to raise the debt ceiling. And if they don't, then what they're going to want to do is to cut spending so that we don't need to raise the debt ceiling and we can move forward in a way that's responsible.
Bob?
Well, I'm just dumbfounded that we're here talking about the authority of the United States to pay the bills. We're not talking about the amount of the debt. We're not talking about paying the debt. We're talking about the authority to pay the bills we owe. That is a non-political situation. And the United States 100 times, it was in the Washington Post today, 100 times has raised the debt ceiling because it's been a functional pro forma thing that, by the way, if Obama didn't do it, he'd be in violation of the Constitution. It even says that he has that authority. So this is a nonsense argument, and what we ought to do is, I think, given that the Republicans won't give him that power, what we have to do is maybe the compromise that people are talking about, which is at least during his presidency, allow him the authority with some arrangement and some deal. And then
but Bob, I have to ask you, if the president were supposed to have the power as a constitutional construct, the founders would have given it to him. And if we want him to have it, it's within our reach to do so. It takes a constitutional amendment, though, which would, of course, require 2/3 of the Congress proposing or 2/3 of the state legislature. legislature proposing, and then it would have to be ratified by either A, 3/4 of the state legislature, or B, national conventions held in 3/4 of the states. But right now it's a separated power. And it seems to me that the president expecting Congress to relinquish its separated power as it relates to its one major tool to exert restraint on government overspending would be tantamount to Congress expecting the White House to give up its authority to nominate the next Supreme Court justice. I mean, if you want to protect the integrity of the separated powers belonging to this president, why is it you in the same breath would expect Congress to relinquish theirs? Bob Weiner.
I'm just trying to read what, everybody can Google here. President Obama to invoke the 14th Amendment and raise the debt ceiling. What's the 14th Amendment say? Let's all read it. A constitutional escape hatch should President Obama and Congress fail to use the 14th Amendment to raise the debt ceiling unilaterally if he wants to. What does the 14th Amendment say? Let's all just read it.
Well, I'm all right with that. Go ahead. You hit me with your favorite part.
I'm about to do it. I'm Googling. That's what I'm saying. We all have to do
well,
it.
let me explain what the Constitution says while he looks it up. The Constitution says that the president is required, the United States government is required to pay its debts, which includes money we borrowed from overseas or elsewhere, and things like pensions, things in which we have.
Let me cut through it all, guys. Let me cut in through it. Whoa, Bob, let me cut in through. Bob, let me cut through it all. Bob, I'll cut through it all because I've got to render it with greater brevity. We're on radio, okay? And the reason I think it's a laughable argument that a lot of Democrats have as it relates to this is that the president, the idea that he has the right to lift the debt ceiling unilaterally because the 14th Amendment essentially says so is crazy. This also exposes how comically bereft of knowledge you guys really are. Here's why you guys think the 14th Amendment backs you up on this. In the 14th Amendment, Section 4, it says, the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned. Well, guess what? I agree with that, but that's nothing but a tertiary measure used to dodge the primary one already provided to us by the actual dispute in question, otherwise known as the rub. Here, let me point it out more specifically for you so that even Bob Weiner can follow me. Yes, the debt should not be questioned, and we've already acknowledged this on the show, but Bob, not raising the debt ceiling is not questioning the debt. It's merely forcing the government to restrain spending as well as compelling it to utilize the billions of already existing dollars currently allocated to duplicated programs of waste as defined by what? The Fed's own government accounting office. For example, what right do you have to hit me up for repeated 10 spots if you and I both know that you've already got a bunch of 20s hidden in the couch? What motivation do you have to get up off your ass and start digging for your already existing stash of cash if you're continuously enabled by others with handouts? In this case, we're talking about taxpayers who have already paid their fair share. Bob, there's two ends of the wax candle of debt. Yes, you can either, on one end, increase the debt ceiling, or B, remove existing debt. And it's well within our reach to do that. Your argument assumes that the latter is a non-existing option. Well, if we accept that narrative, I guess it sounds like you have a point. But the truth is, you don't, because we really do have that option. More upon a return. You are with Battle Line, Main Street Radio Network. I'm Alan Nathan. Everybody, welcome back. Ever yours, Alan Nathan, the militant moderate. Once again, this is the Oasis. For those who have an aversion to the left, right, black, white, two-dimensional approach, we have assisting me in the opining department, old friends of the show, none other than Amy Ridenauer with the National Center for Public Policy Research. Amy, good to have you back.
Thank you, Alan.
On board as well, old friend of the show, Robert Weiner, Democratic strategist, columnist, and former communications director for Clinton Drug Czar General Barry McCaffrey, also former chief of staff of the House Committee on Aging. By the way, also former communications director for Congressman Rangel and Conyers of New York and Michigan, respectively. Bob actually goes back quite a way, I think, to the Truman administration, do you not, Bob, if memory serves?
Really? I'm that old. Hey, I'm just looking. I said let's do our homework, and the 14th Amendment, Bill Clinton said he would use it without question to raise the debt ceiling and force the courts to stop me. And the legal experts, I don't see one where it says they would do anything other than support President Obama if he used it, if the Congress blocked raising the debt ceiling. That
it would have been his.
Constitution is.
Go ahead, Amy.
Even the Obama administration, just last week, Jay Carney said from the podium that this White House does not hold that view. The bottom line is the debts are actual debts that they're talking about we have to pay. They're not talking about when you give money to people for welfare or you give money to PBS or you build a bridge, things for which you are not obligated. Only obligations like pensions, bills, like if we bought paper from somebody or if we owe interest or you have to pay back the debt. And we can afford that many times over from current revenues. So we don't have an
Not only that, hold it. What we just heard from the president also sort of undercuts the sinews of your argument, Bob, because the president, yes, has been insisting that we can't dodge the fiscal cliff without, raising tax rates. Republicans, of course, insisting that we can, and cite the president's own debt reduction commission that said so. Obama agreed with them. I mean, you just heard what the president said. The president just said in that clip, what we've said was give us $1.2 trillion in additional revenues. And he said this last year, July 22nd. He said what we've said was give us $1.2 trillion in additional revenues, which could be accomplished without hiking taxes or tax rates, but could simply be accomplished by eliminating loopholes, eliminating some deductions, and engaging in a tax reform process that could have lowered rates generally while broadening the base. This is the president, and Obama's agreeing with the Republicans and what they're saying right now. Again, in July of last year, the president was saying something very, very different when he asserted at the White House press conference that there was $1.2 trillion in savings by way of removing loopholes and deductions. Now, Bob, if he can get that through removing loopholes and deductions, where then exist the grounds for your 14th Amendment claim, Bob Weiner?
Well, it's apples and oranges. If we're going,
it's not apples and oranges. You can't dodge accountability.
Go
ahead.
More than 2 words? I hope so.
Go ahead. Just don't.
There's
no
a difference
disinformation
between the authority and the fact that Obama wants to do it by consensus of the Congress. I don't blame him for wanting to do it by consensus of the Congress. I'm talking about if he's boxed into a corner, and we're at the point again where the debt rating of the United States is about to be lowered by the major world raters. If that's the case, then we.
But that subjunctive doesn't work with our money already there, Bob. You can cut the rate. You can meet our immediate solvency standards or immediate solvency needs by either raising the debt ceiling, sure, or B, you do it by removing the generated debt that would otherwise bring us to that brink. We don't have to chop it from the top of the candle. We can chop it from the bottom. And your president made that clear in that very verbiage. You heard the clip.
Right,
he said that.
What's going to happen? The same thing I said in the last
What
show.
do you say in response? Wait. What do you say in response to what Obama said? What do you say in response to what your president said July of last year as it relates to this very specific issue? Because his statement is categorically antithetical to your characterization and narrative now, Bob Weiner.
There are plenty of places we can get the money from. We could get it from the war spending. We could get it from tax breaks that Bush put in. We can get it from spending that we do. There's no question about it. But the fact of the matter is that the American people voted by over 60%.
Constitution is not up for a vote, Bob. The Constitution is not up for a vote. It's not up for a vote. No. Popular vote doesn't trample. Popular vote doesn't trump the Constitution. The Constitution is the people's written directive to the very government it created. And not one of the branches has the right to thwart the mandates of the very document from which the powers are derived and to which they're each subordinate. I've said this a billion times because it's true. Anytime legislative law conflicts with constitutional law trumps legislative law each and every time.
Obama to raise the debt ceiling, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about how we're really
can't raise the debt ceiling because, look, Bob, the only reason why, and Amy, I'm going to go to Amy on you on this because Bob, I think, is just on some pharmacological holiday from which he'll never be returning. Bob, I mean, Amy, to you, I think people forget the only reason why we have checks and bounces. It's not more. Checks and bounces aren't just.
Did you say?
Checks and bounces aren't just. Oh, he said this. Now I get to say that. The only reason why we have checks and bounces, Amy, is because each branch has certain absolute powers beyond the reach of the other two. That's how they each protect their own prerogatives. Amy Ridenour, that being the case, this president, according to Barney Frank, even as he was leaving, made it abundantly clear does not enjoy access to the separated power belonging to another branch, which this debt ceiling discussion and authority most certainly is, yes?
Exactly. The debt ceiling authority goes to the Congress, and the president can't raise it. But he does not need to raise it in order to keep our credit rating high. And the reason that is true is because the credit rating is based on us paying our obligations. We do not have to pay voluntary payments. The mass of our spending is voluntary payments. Like Bob, and I've been on with him for 2 years now, and he always hates defense spending. Well, that stuff is voluntary. If we have a contract for a plane and we owe that money, we have to pay for the plane. We don't have to send soldiers somewhere. We don't have to keep people employed. This is something liberals should all be for. Similarly, many, many, many domestic programs are all voluntary. What President Obama did last year, which I believe was wrong of him, and what he clearly is threatening to do again, is to threaten not to pay our obligations and to instead pay our voluntary payments first. You should not do that. You just pay the obligations, our credit rating will be fine, and cut the budget of the things we don't really have to do.
Bob Weiner.
I never heard the president threaten not to pay any of our debts, but if that's the way you want to paint it, that's fine. That we're in a rational discussion now. We are days from the fiscal cliff, and we're also days from Christmas. This will not be the Grinch that stole Christmas. There will be half the tax rates that Obama wants repealed, and there'll be half of the entitlement reforms that Boehner wants done. And that's where the deal is going to get struck, and it's going to be between December 15th and 22nd, so it's just before Christmas, and a wonderful Christmas present to all. That's what's actually going to happen.
Actually, in part, Bob Corker, let me say this real fast. In part, Bob Corker, Senator Bob Corker from the great state of Tennessee, kind of agrees with Bob, but then agrees with you, Amy. But before I get to that, I want to share this, what was said as far as the debt ceiling is concerned by then Senator Obama and his vote on the debt ceiling hike. He did this in 2006. He said, quote, "The fact that we are here today to debate raising America's debt limit is a sign of leadership failure. It is a sign that the U.S. government can't pay its own bills. It is a sign that we now depend on ongoing financial assistance from foreign countries to finance our government's reckless fiscal policies. Increasing America's debt weakens us domestically and internationally. Leadership means that the buck stops here. Instead, Washington is shifting the burden of bad choices today onto the backs of our children and grandchildren. America has a debt problem and a failure of leadership. Americans deserve better." Bob, this man seems to belong to the do as I say, not as I do crowd as it relates to the debt ceiling. Apparently, when he wanted to oppose the debt ceiling hike, it was permissible. Now it is not. I'm sorry. At one point or another, words fall and rise on the meaning. Words have meaning, and if you're going to use them, what you say must have something to do with what they mean.
You know what happened in the interim? 2 wars, tax cuts, and a recession. That's what
the wars are already around.
Irrelevant.
So
irrelevant. Well, actually, Bob,
$6 trillion increase in those costs.
The circumstances would. Well, no, the circumstances actually are so dire that it makes opposing the raising of the debt ceiling, or at least making it contingent upon replacing whatever we raise it by, counterbalanced by whatever we reduce the spending by, all that much more important. But let's have a listen, Derek, if you can. Give us Bob Corker, Republican senator from the great state of Tennessee.
There is a growing group of folks that are looking at this and realizing that we don't have a lot of cards as it relates to the tax issue before year end. I mean, we have one House, that's it. The presidency and the Senate's in the Democrats' hands. So a lot of people are putting forth a theory, and I actually think it has merit, where you go ahead and give the president the 2% increase that he's talking about, the rate increase on the top 2%. And all of a sudden, the shift goes back to entitlements. I actually am beginning to believe that is the best route for us to take.
Bob, is that a possible way to go?
As long as the entitlement cuts aren't devastating to the people that are out of poverty, because that is their safety net.